Take Batman, the greatest detective, plop him in the Victorian era, and have him take on one of the most compelling unsolved serial killer cases in history, Jack the Ripper. But then they go and make it even cooler by having Jack move to this really awesome Victorian Gotham City and give Batman and the Ripper a personal connection. The story even sees Bruce accused of being the killer himself, which adds yet another layer on top of everything else. Also, we have to talk about how incredibly cool the art style in this comic is, which came from Mike Mignola, who created Hellboy, and it just works perfectly in this Victorian setting. It's actually just a big old treat to read. Gotham by Gaslight was one of DC's most successful Elseworlds stories, and it got expanded on as Earth 19 with even more Victorian era steampunk style DC heroes, including the Atom, Green Lantern, and Wonder Woman, not to mention versions of a bunch of Batman's rogues gallery. Next up, Earth 47 is home to a version of the Justice League known as the Love Syndicate, whose members include Sunshine Superman, Shooting Star, who is actually Bruce Wayne, who got inspired by a shooting star instead of a bat, Speed Freak, who is a speedster, obviously, Brother Power, who is a mannequin brought to life by a lightning bolt, Prez Rickard, who is the immortal president of the United States, and the Magic Lantern, who is just a Green Lantern that literally looks like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. It's fantastic. As you may have noticed, it's all love in this universe, with everything being seemingly inspired by the 70s, and everyone just being pretty darn groovy. This universe first appeared in Animal Man number 23 and unfortunately got removed by the Crisis on Infinite Earths, but luckily Grant Morrison liked it so much that he brought it back and included it in his Multiversity guidebook, meaning it can totally come back at some point. Next up, the Linearverse is an alternate reality where the people age so slowly that it's almost safe to say that they don't age at all. Batman began his career in 1939, with his youth lasting for decades instead of the normal aging of a human. In a way, this kind of represents how comic book characters seemingly never age and grow old, except in certain stories. Now, by the late 20th century, the world had most of its superheroes, and after this point, things get a little whack and just kinda go completely off the rails. Earth became a dystopia ruled by the wealthy, which is a little bit too real, and a great disaster was foreseen that actually came to pass. Then, the world became very similar to the one in the Earth AD storyline. Anthropomorphized animals had become the rulers of the planet, with humans devolving, save for Kamandi and a few others. Then, in the 25th century, humanity seemingly built a high-tech society which saw the rise of Michael Carter, Booster Gold. In the 31st century, Earth became the base of the Legion of Superheroes, who were an interplanetary superhero team. This world, it's just a wild ride. Batman Holy Terror was the very first comic to actually carry the Elseworlds logo, and boy was it a strong start. The story of Holy Terror takes place in an alternate timeline where Oliver Cromwell lived long enough to solidify the rule of Puritans in 17th century England. That changed, and 300 years later, the entirety of North America is part of a commonwealth led and run by a super oppressive priestly government that does all it does in the name of God. Being a Batman story, we obviously follow Bruce Wayne, who in this world starts off by preparing to become another member of the clergy before he learns that his parents were assassinated by the government because of their radical political beliefs. So naturally, he becomes Batman to fight back. Along the way, he uncovers some incredibly dark secrets held by this oppressive government, including the fate of a whole bunch of metahumans who either became victims of government experiments or were created by the government in the first place. JLA Age of Wonder is an Elseworlds story that gives us a world where Superman lands on Earth in the 1850s and makes himself known to the world at the 1876 Centennial Exposition. Naturally, this Superman starts working with the greatest minds of his time, including Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, and of course, this world's Lex Luthor. Unfortunately, since humans be humans, a lot of their new technological innovations are really just going towards massive devices of destruction and war. So, to combat this, Superman and the League of Science do whatever they can to prevent the start of World War I. This world is very clearly steampunk inspired in a wholly different way to Gotham by Gaslight, and we get really cool versions of Green Lantern, Starman, and the Flash, but reimagined as Victorian era scientists who are also superheroes. But arguably, the best part about this world is that it comes to us in a 2-issue comic miniseries, so you can read it in like less than a day. Tangent Comics was a DC Comics imprint created in 1997 and was made up of various one-shots focused on creating all new characters using established DC names like the Joker, Batman, the Flash, etc, etc. Now the Tangent universe, also known as Earth 97, radically diverged from our own timeline thanks to the appearance of metahumans who interfered in the Cuban Missile Crisis, which escalated drastically, leading to a limited nuclear exchange that resulted in the obliteration of both Florida and Cuba. Now the heroes of this world are pretty radically different. For example, this world's Flash is actually the first human born in space who gained light-based powers. Wonder Woman is an exiled warrior from another planet, which is, somewhat similar. And Green Lantern is a mysterious character who can bring back the dead. Next up is the Survival Zone. Now, the Survival Zone is a world that has had only one very tiny appearance, but the appearance it had seems incredibly hilarious. In the classic version of Supergirl's origin story, the Survival Zone is a pocket dimension discovered by Kara's pops, Zor-El, before the destruction of Krypton. Now, why is it called the Survival Zone? Oh, let me tell you. It's called the Survival Zone because it's where Zor-El and Allura had run off to survive the destruction of the Kryptonian homeworld. The absolutely hilarious part about the Survival Zone is that Zor-El seems to have just decided that he wouldn't tell a single other soul on Krypton about the existence of a surefire way to save millions of Kryptonians. Instead, the pair saved themselves and avoided the destruction of everyone and everything they've ever known. Appearing in Superboy number 95, Earth 95 is a world that kind of makes no sense. And it's all because of how it is that the heroes even get there. Well, actually, for starters, what's really weird is that this comic's main heroes include both of Superman's parents, Jor-El and Lara. Instead of traveling to this alternate Earth in any of the ways we have ever seen before, Jor-El and Lara actually have to make their ship bigger and bigger and bigger in order to get there. Now we've seen stuff like this with concepts like a microverse, so I guess going from a microverse to a regular world again would kind of be the same thing, but for some reason my brain really just cannot comprehend how you can get so large that you enter a different universe. This kind of hurts my brain. We're moving on. Next up is Earth 235, and it's a world that plays host to DC's Real Worlds imprint. Now as you can probably guess from the title, Real Worlds takes place in a world very much like our own. Superheroes don't exist in the way that we are used to seeing in comic books. For example, Real Worlds Batman follows Charlie Duffy, a 27-year-old disabled man who works as a convenience store worker in New York and is friendly and well known in the neighborhood. He named an old cat lady as Catwoman, and his old friend Clarissa was Robin, with her ex-boyfriend being the Joker. Do you see why it's weird? The funny thing is, it's actually still really inspiring. It's real-life people inspired by heroes in various different ways to start fighting crime in their own unique little real-world ways. And it's cute. Kind of. Next up is Earth 265, which was featured fittingly in Flash issue number 265. The story featured an invasion from another alternate Earth, or the denizens of that Earth were in danger of being struck by a comet, and they decided to vibrate their Earth fast enough that it would swap places with the main universe Earth, sparing their world and destroying ours instead. It's a rather interesting concept in a rather interesting early Flash comic, but the story isn't the part that's weird. I mean, yeah, it's weird, but the really strange part comes when we finally meet the denizens of this alternate world. The dominant species on this Earth have evolved not from apes like us, but from cetaceans, so dolphins. Naturally, they are like bluish, purplish, gray color, and they have pointed ears like elves. It's weird, I don't know.
At number 10 is Batman, Hellboy, Starman. Ever heard of the non-canonical crossover between Batman, Hellboy, and Starman? I hope not, otherwise I already failed. In this Elseworlds tale, the Golden Age Starman, Ted Knight, finds himself kidnapped by some neo-skinheads during a lecture on alternative energy sources. And who comes to the rescue? Well, Batman and Hellboy, of course. Together they track down the mysterious Knights of October to find a creepy deserted airfield. A rescue mission unfolds, but the Knights' leader, Dance, makes a daring escape with Ted Knight still in his clutches. Now here's the twist. Batman has to leave to deal with the Jokers, so it's up to Ted's son, Jack Knight, the new Starman, to team up with Hellboy for the mission. Batman bids them farewell as they set off to the Amazon rainforest, but things take a dark turn when they immediately come under fire. As they infiltrate the enemy's defenses, they discover Dance's Ted's diabolical plan to reanimate the demon Sugar Yagoroth using Ted's scientific knowledge. At number 9 is Batman and Captain America, a world where Batman and Captain America team up during World War II. Not your typical comic book crossover, but it's one of those hidden gems from DC Elseworlds. In this alternate reality, the two iconic heroes find themselves fighting a sinister alliance between the Red Skull and the Joker. The story unfolds during the 40s, and it's a fresh take on these heroes, showing a different side of their characters. See, Batman and Cap are optimistic and well-adjusted, and the Joker's more of a clown-themed crime lord than a crazed unaliver. The Gotham Project replaces the Manhattan Project, adding an intriguing twist to the story, and of course, there's the inevitable clash between Batman and Captain America. But instead of an all-out brawl, they quickly realize that they're on the same side and join forces. Now the twist actually comes when Joker ends up being the unlikely hero, turning against Red Skull when he discovers that the Red Skull is actually one of the Axis powers. It's a wild ride through the golden age of comics filled with humor, action, and unexplained alliances. Who would have thought that the Joker could be a patriotic American hero in his own bizarre way? If you're enjoying the video so far, please support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. I would really appreciate it. At number 8 is Red Rain. In Batman Red Rain, we witness the Caped Crusader's transformation into a vampire to take on the Lord of Vampires himself, Dracula. This trilogy of graphic novels takes the iconic hero to the realm of Victorian horror. See, Red Rain kicks things off as Batman defeats Dracula, but becomes a vampire in the process. In Bloodstorm, Batman struggles to resist his newfound vampiric nature, but tragedy strikes when he drains the Joker's blood for eliminating Catwoman. His loyal allies, Alfred and Gordon, stake him, leaving him in a catatonic state. Fast forward to Crimson Mist, and criminals have overrun Gotham. Batman, now more animalistic due to isolation, goes on a bloodthirsty rampage, taking out foes in brutal fashion. Alfred, Gordon, Two-Face, and Killer Croc team up to put an end to the blood-sucking Batman, thus ending this chilling Elseworlds saga. At number 7 is Superman at Earth's End, where we find the Man of Steel in a post-apocalyptic world. Earth's in a mess, and a bunch of emotionless cyborgs called the Biomech Sevens are playing janitor trying to restore order. Meanwhile, our boy Superman has been chilling in a floating city, soaking in some rays to regain his strength. But it looks like Gotham City is next in line for cleansing via a nuclear bomb because it's swarming with mutants and degenerates. Supes heads down to Gotham to stop the madness, only to find some bat-like mutants messing with him. Surprise, surprise, his powers are waning as well because, I mean, look at him, he's pretty old. But don't worry, he gets saved by a gang of Mohawk youth on motorcycles. Turns out they're protecting the Batcave, and Batman's body has gone missing, and the culprits are a mysterious group known as the DNA Dictators, who use Batman's DNA to turn people into mindless creatures. Superman decides to be a hero and battles against giant robots, but his strength is fading fast. He retreats to the Batcave, but looks like they're all out of options, except for an oversized pew-pew Batman had called the Expunger. Supes hesitates because he's all anti-pew-pew, but desperate times call for desperate measures. They face off against an army of mutated lion men and mutant SS troopers. Because guess who's behind the DNA Dictators? Clone versions of that dictator from World War II. But here's the twist. They unleash a monstrous Batman creature that got Bruce Wayne's memories. Superman takes it down, but gets filled with lead by the clones. At number 6 is Batman in Bethlehem. In a forgotten corner of the DC multiverse lies a little hidden gem from 2007 that you might have missed. This tale is of the Bat, but not the one you know. You see, Batman in Bethlehem, tucked away in Batman issue number 666, catapults us 15 years into Gotham's future, and here, Damian Wayne is the offspring of Bruce Wayne, who dons the cowl as the new Batman. In this reality, Damian investigates a string of mob boss unalivings, and the city's finest point fingers at the Dark Knight. But our hero was too busy hunting the real unaliver, a twisted fake Batman who goes by Bat Devil. He claims to be the Antichrist, out to reshape the world to favor the strong, crushing the weak. The story culminates in a showdown at Hotel Bethlehem, a dark ritual site in the shape of a star formed by the unaliving location. Batman takes on Bat Devil and his gang in a brutal face-off, ultimately snuffing out the wicked. As the dust settles, Commissioner Barbara Gordon arrives, and Batman, standing over Bat Devil's fiery remains, declares that for now, the apocalypse is off the table, unless he says otherwise. At number 5 is Superman in War of the Worlds. Supes is a last hope for Earth against a Martian invasion. This alternate DC Elseworlds tale, the Martians, fueled by their envy of Earth, decide to pay us a visit. A strange metal cylinder crashes, and out of it comes the Martians with their lethal weapons. Clark Kent, our future Man of Steel, reveals his powers to defend the world. The Martians wreak havoc, and our planet falls into chaos. Major cities are conquered, the leaders are taken out, and humans become second-rate citizens. Twist here is that it's not just the Martians who are vulnerable. You see, Earth's bacteria are making them sick, while Superman, with this Kryptonian biology, remains immune. Luthor, initially aiding the Martians, later teams up with Lois and Clark to fight back. Superman pushes himself to the limit, but ultimately succeeds, saving Earth from the Martian invaders. Luthor eventually finds a way to wipe out the remaining Martians, and Earth begins to rebuild. At number 4 is the Superman monster. This is a Superman Frankenstein remix that's just in time for the spooky season. It all starts out with a guy named Victor Luthor, a college student who was into some seriously unorthodox experiments like raising the unalive. His college wasn't so thrilled, to say the least. They kicked him out faster than you can say supernatural. But here's where it gets wild. Luthor plans to marry into some wealth, but that plan takes a nosedive when he learns that he won't get a cent for the marriage. So he's out sulking in the forest, and then boom, an alien spaceship falls out of the sky. Inside, he finds the plans for reanimating the unalived. He goes all mad scientist, and long story short, ends up creating a messed up Superman who calls him dad. Things get out of hand. The lab's on fire, Luthor's injured, and Super Son rescues him. But the world isn't ready for Superman, so he goes out to live on a farm, kind of like old school Superman. He becomes Claus, learns to be human, helps out the farm, but Luthor ain't having any of that. He bribes a mob to attack the farm, and it's absolute mayhem. It's basically the story of Frankenstein but with Superman in it. Like, come on guys. At number 3, Captain Leatherwing. Alright mateys, let's dive deep into the waters of DC's Elseworlds tale with Leatherwing, the pirate Batman. This swashbuckling adventure unfolds on the high seas as Leatherwing and his crew, after a bit of plundering, find themselves caught in a plot to steal his secret treasure hoard. The Laughing Man, his sinister foe, is on the hunt for this treasure and enlists Tatiana Felina to seduce and distract Leatherwing. Meanwhile, our young hero Robin sneaks aboard the Flying Fox and discovers mutiny in the making. He warns Leatherwing, who gladly accepts him into the crew. Things get even more complicated with Felina and Leatherwing's romance take an unexpected turn and betrayals are abound. As the sea battle unfolds, Robin makes a heroic sacrifice and Leatherwing confronts the Laughing Man in a climactic showdown. The story ends with the pirate couple, Felina and Leatherwing, sailing the high seas together, leaving the Laughing Man to rest beneath the waves. At number 2 is Gotham Noir, a hidden gem in DC Elseworlds collection which takes us on a mind-bending journey into the seedy underbelly of Gotham City in 1949. Picture a grittier black and white Batman world where Commissioner Gordon isn't a clean-cut cop, but a hard-drinking, hard-boiled private eye entangled in a web of corruption and conspiracy. When a dame ends up unalived and Gordon is framed for the unaliving, it's a descent into madness. But the twist here is that Batman is here, but his existence remains a mystery. Is he Bruce Wayne or just a figment of Gordon's booze-soaked imagination? It's like the ultimate detective story within a detective story. Selina Kyle hints at Bruce's double life, yet Harley Dent suggests that Batman is just a rumor. The kicker is that Batman and Bruce seem to coexist in separate places, blurring the lines between reality and illusion. So was Gordon talking to an invisible Bat vigilante or just talking to himself? Gotham Noir messes with your head and leaves you questioning reality. At number 1 is the Justice Riders. In this twisted tale, you've got Felix Faust, a notorious troublemaker, locked in the small town of Paradise. He's got an eerie warning that something dreadful is on its way to obliterate the place, but Sheriff Oberon isn't buying it until the town gets engulfed in mysterious lights and rumblings. Sheriff Diana Prince, a no-nonsense lawkeeper, takes charge after the devastation, and the unlikely team-up begins with Kid Flash, Booster Gold, and Hawkman. Their mission is to stop the sinister Maxwell Lord and his army of clockwork robots from constructing a railway to California by any means necessary. The story takes unexpected twists and turns with the arrival of the relentless bounty hunter Guy Gardner and the mysterious John Jones. As our heroes confront Lord, the real chaos unfolds with a steam-powered robot called Lord Havoc. This ride through the Wild West is a thrilling adventure with a unique blend of steampunk, sci-fi, and classic western elements. If you're looking for an offbeat DC story that's sure to surprise and entertain, Justice Riders is a hidden treasure you don't want to miss. So saddle up for the ride into this untamed territory where justice knows no bounds.
Number 10. Batman vs. Bigby. You know Batman, but have you ever read or heard of the Fables series? It's one of my favorite comic series. It basically follows classic fairy tale characters living in modern day New York. The Big Bad Wolf, otherwise known as Bigby Wolf, is the sheriff of their community. In 2021, we got the limited DC Black Label series Batman vs. Bigby, a wolf in Gotham, which is a collaboration between these two comic worlds, with Bigby as a main suspect for murders in Gotham. If you like the Fables world and you like Batman, you'll love this little mashup. Number 9. JSA, The Liberty Files. The Justice Society of America, The Liberty Files, is a DC Elseworlds story from 2000 to 2003, which makes it non-canonical. Any story that lets writers go outside the rules of the DC canon always makes for stories that I personally love. Alright, so what's it about? The series took characters from the JSA, but turned them into covert government operatives in World War II. Specifically, the story centered on 3 heroes: Batman, called Bat, Our Man, called Clock, and Dr. Midnight, called Owl. I know, really creative names. The 3 were known as the Unholy Three, and their mission, at least in the Part 1 story, is to find Jack the Grin, who is the Joker, who has information about the German weapon Übermensch, or Superman. Are you sold yet? Number 8. Earth 15. Earth 15 first appeared in 2007 in Countdown number 30. This Earth was basically a perfected Earth with heroes who evolved to become nearly perfect beings, with most of the proteges like Jason Todd, Donna Troy, Zod, and Kyle Rayner taking over the original heroes' roles. That is, until the events of Flashpoint, when it was destroyed by the crazed Superboy Prime. That little rascal. The still existing dimension became a graveyard universe, eventually being modified by Hal Jordan into an Earth whose heroes had personalities opposite to the Prime Earth versions. It's an interesting place for sure, and some interesting things have happened in it. Check it out. Before we go on to number 7, I got something to tell you. You're great. You guys keep hitting that like and subscribe button, you're making me blush, my goodness. Keep up that support, it helps us bust out more and more of these videos for you lovely people. Alright, moving on. Number 7. Earth 20. Earth 20, which appeared in Final Crisis Superman Beyond number 1 in 2008, is the home of Kent Nelson, otherwise known as Doc Fate. And he is so cool. Basically, he leads the Society of Superheroes on Earth 20, which is a group that includes Lady Blackhawk, Immortal Man, the Green Lantern, the Mighty Atom, and Batman from time to time. The history of this world isn't exactly very well known, but we do know it has just come out of a war that is somewhat like World War II. There are Zeppelins flying around in some cities, and the cars are all big and beautiful. It's got a very slick 20s style. The heroes of this world would do righteous battle against a society of supervillains from Earth 40 and a huge 5-year war. My goodness. Number 6. Batman White Knight. I cannot recommend this 2017 story enough to you guys. It is an insanely interesting and fantastic Joker story. It takes place in an alternate Gotham City, and the Joker regains his sanity after a brutal and violent forced ingestion of a medicine by Batman. The roles are practically reversed, as the seemingly reformed Joker, real name Jack Napier, becomes the White Knight, hoping to better Gotham City as a politician, while also condemning Batman as an unhinged violent vigilante. Which, I mean, it's kinda hard to argue against that point of view. He sued the GCPD for police brutality, and he worked against the 1%, who used Batman and Gotham's crime for their own financial benefit. Joker actually becomes a good guy. It's kind of insane. But there is more to this story, and I highly suggest you check it out. Number 5. Earth 14. Alright, this is gonna be a pretty quick one. There is not a whole heck of a lot of information out there about Earth 14, which first appeared in Superman Volume 4, number 15 in 2017. I want to talk about it because the Justice League of Assassins is just the coolest looking version of the Justice League I have ever seen, even if it was just for a short period of time. The Assassins are made up of alternate heavy weapon bearing versions of Wonder Woman, Batman, Harley Quinn, Flash, Aquaman, what looks like it could be Green Lantern, and Superman. They only last about 3 pages of the comic they are a part of, but I really hope we see them pop up in other stories because these guys are just so rad. All we saw them do was fight a bunch of gatherers in a post-apocalypse looking Earth. Number 4. Batman 89. Okay, you can fight me in the comments about this one. Batman 89 was published in 2021, but the stories take place in the Tim Burton Batman movie's world. Seeing how we haven't actually seen a comic in this world, I'm gonna take this one, okay? Cool. So yes, this is that Batman and Bruce Wayne in this comic. He has the same suit from the movie, the same amazing Batmobile, and it takes place after the events of the movies, but it's more like comic heavy. It's really, really cool. We see Harvey Dent actually become Two-Face, Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman is back, and we even get a Robin for this universe. It's so awesome. I don't want to spoil too much, so you can probably guess what I'm gonna say. Go give it a read. Number 3, DC vs. Vampires. The ongoing DC vs. Vampires limited series that started in 2021 is such an amazing story. It just makes sense. Pit the characters of the DC universe against a growing army of vampires? A mystery around who the superhero vampire leader is? It's great! The basic premise, without spoiling much, is that Mary, Queen of Blood, who upholds the peace between vampires and humans, is dead. Whoever killed her also killed the Legion of Doom, and has made a plan for vampires to take over the world. Andrew Bennett, a vampire, went to the Justice League to tell them about the army of vampire supervillains. There's a vampire Gorilla Grodd, like, come on. The story has a large Batman and Bat family presence, as a story about vampires should, and for a story so grim, it actually has some really funny moments. Especially from Damian Wayne, as I'm sure no one is surprised by. Number 2, DC Bombshells. DC Comics Bombshells is an awesome story from 2015 that focuses on a reality where a team of female superheroes fight on the side of the Allies during World War II. It actually first came to be because of a line of statuettes released by DC with superheroines wearing retro 40s inspired costumes. They were so popular that they moved to variant covers, and then they got their own series. Each hero has their own style and story, while still all being part of this bigger, wider alternate World War II story. It's truly awesome, and mainly follows Batwoman, Wonder Woman, Supergirl, Stargirl, Zatanna, and the Batgirls. Go give it a little gander, would you? Number 1, Dark Knights of Steel. And now for my favorite. Dark Knights of Steel. Swords, sorcery, superheroes. Dark Knights of Steel is a story that actually came out this year, that's 2022 if you're watching this from the future, but is set in an alternate medieval fantasy universe. Batman is an actual knight and half Kryptonian. Like, I'm just in love. Okay, so basically, Jor-El and Lara escape Krypton before it is destroyed and crash land on the medieval Earth, and eventually become the rulers of the land after giving birth to Kal-El. It's wild. There are alternate versions of Green Lantern, Supergirl, Harley Quinn, Robins, Alfred, Constantine, Green Arrow, Joker, Green Lantern, Black Lightning, and more. I love to see comic book publishers do these time-displaced stories. It's great. Number 10. Earth 3. The post-Flashpoint Earth 3 is similar to its pre-Flashpoint Earth, but way better. This Earth is the birthplace of evil. The mentality here isn't good versus evil, it's more like just evil. Strength is respected more than anything else, with the weak basically being annihilated. Instead of the Justice League, Earth 3 is home to the Crime Syndicate of America, whose members include Ultraman, Superwoman, Owlman, Power Ring, Johnny Quick, Sea King, The Outsider, Grid, and John Johns. Earth 3 was reintroduced in 2013 and has played a part in Darkseid War in 2015, Dark Knight's Death Metal in 2020, and in 2021 it was reborn again in the Infinite Frontier story. Like I said, when we started, the DC universe is complicated, but what's remained the same since 2013 is that some of the coolest stories come out of Earth 3. Number 9, Earth 1. Earth 1 and the number 10 pick are probably the oldest of the Earths and universes on this list. Earth 1 first appeared in 2008 in its New 52 form, but it introduced a whole spectrum of readers into the DC universe, and sales for its comics were through the roof. So I believe it deserves a spot on the list. Here, superheroes are all younger, and they all just started their superhero careers. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the Teen Titans, and Green Lantern all have graphic novels that take place on this Earth, and they are all just fresher takes on the almost overdone superhero origin stories. With the characters all being younger, it was also very easy for younger readers to relate to, and gave the characters conflicts that they wouldn't have faced as their prime Earth counterparts. Number 8. Injustice Universe. The Injustice Universe of Earth 22 is the universe in which the events of the Injustice video game and its related comics take place, and it first popped up in 2013. So here in the Injustice world, Superman went a little bonkers. After the Joker tricked Supes into killing both Lois Lane and her unborn child, plus unintentionally blowing up Metropolis, Superman murdered the Joker and eventually became a tyrannical ruler of Earth. The Batman of Injustice creates an insurgency, eventually enlisting the aid of another Earth, Earth 1 of this reality. With the alternate Earth's help, he overthrew Superman's regime and rebuilt the world. And that's all just part of the first game. Number 7. The 53rd World. The 53rd World, named by the smart primates who live there, was a world unknown to the rest of the multiverse. It's set in a near future where presumably the world is inhabited by super smart apes, like Planet of the Apes style. Oh, and also, immortality was achieved in 2067, meaning that yes, all these ultra smart apes are immortal. We know that there exists alternate ape versions of Superman, Batman, the Atom, and Aquaman. The existence of this Earth was first revealed in 2018's Dark Knight's Rising: The Wild Hunt, when Detective Chimp was beginning to lose his intelligence. The ape heroes show up, recruited by Raven, Cyborg, and the Flash to help with the dark multiverse, saying they were here to help. Obviously. Detective Chimp, accompanied by the apes of the 53rd Earth, plus Flash, Cyborg, and Raven, go to help Earth Zero's Justice League fight the dark multiverse forces. That's kind of all we know about the 53rd Earth. I want more super apes! Number 6. Archive of Worlds. The Archive of Worlds isn't so much an alternate Earth, it's actually an artificial multiverse which contains pocket dimensions in the form of film reels. Now that's just kinda nuts on its own, but then take into account the fact that it was created by a mad god, dceu, who is the god of tales, who is jealous of the new god of tales, which is the internet. It's pretty nuts. He tried to steal the new god's soul and was instead encased in a Wayne Tech satellite where he created the Archive of Worlds. First appearing in Batman/Superman Volume 2, number 16 in 2021, the pocket dimensions include a world where Superman never came to be, as well as one where Batman never came to be, a world based on hell, a western world, a world based on the life of Alana Strange, and so many other unnamed worlds. Auteur.io eventually was cured by Batman, and he instead became Observer.io, which is a lot nicer. Number 5. The Linear Verse. The Linear Verse is an alternate reality where the people age so slowly that it's almost safe to say they don't age at all. Batman began his career in 1939, with his youth lasting for decades instead of the normal aging of a human. In a way, this kind of represents how comic book characters seemingly never age and grow old, except in certain stories. By the late 20th century, the world had most of its superheroes. After this point though, things get a little whack. See, Earth became a dystopia ruled by the wealthy, which, I don't know, it seems a bit too real for me. And a great disaster was foreseen that actually came to pass. And the world became very similar to the one in the Earth AD story. Anthropomorphized animals had become the rulers of the planet, with humans devolving, save for Kamandi and a few others. Then, in the 25th century, humanity seemingly built a high-tech society, which saw the rise of Michael Carter, who is Booster Gold. In the 31st century, Earth became the base of the Legion of Superheroes, who were an interplanetary superhero team. This world is just a wild ride. Oh, and it first appeared in Generations Forged number 1 in April of 2021. Number 4. The Metalverse. Okay, I know we're going to talk about the Dark Multiverse, but we haven't talked about, and we need to talk about, the Metalverse. So basically, after Perpetua defeated the Justice League, she gave Prime Earth to the Batman Who Laughs. He and his Dark Knights defeated all the heroes and then reshaped the Earth into his vision. Look at this super cool map! He turned Gotham City into a whole continent super city that is guarded by Joker dragons. He made his home Castle Bat, which is another version of Batman who became a sentient Gotham. There is a hell on Earth called the Hellscape, ruled by Wonder Woman, Arkham Wasteland, ruled over by Harley Quinn, a Superman-powered New Apocalypse prison where all the remaining heroes are held, Megapocalypse with a Rainbow Valley where all the lantern rings lay because no one is worthy that exists anymore. This version of Earth Prime isn't exactly an alternate universe, but it definitely sounds like it should be. Hey nerds, just wanted to say thanks for watching. It means a lot to us. If y'all don't mind smacking that like button, it would help us out. And it helps YouTube know we don't suck. Okay, on to the top 3. Number 3. Green Lantern Legacy. Green Lantern Legacy is a one-shot comic from 2020, in which we are given an alternate Earth where the Green Lanterns of Earth were John Stewart, who we already know, and a Vietnamese woman named Kim Tran. Now, Kim Tran, like most of the Green Lanterns, was an awesome hero who never let evil escape her sight in brightest day or blackest night. She was a pillar for her community too, helping people from all walks of life. And she even helped other Vietnamese immigrants feel at home in this new city. The comic, though, really follows Tai Pham, who is Kim Tran's grandson, as he takes up the mantle of Green Lantern from his grandmother, becoming one of the youngest Green Lanterns at 12 years old. We see him struggle with racism, bullies, his own fears, and against the Yellow Lantern. It's a great story, and it gives some well-needed Vietnamese representation to the DC landscape. Give it a read! Number 2, Deceased. You know how Marvel has the Marvel Zombie storyline? Well, this is basically DC Zombies. That's a bit of an unfair comparison though. The two stories are very different, with the DC version ultimately being slightly more grounded and emotional. In this reality, Cyborg has been captured by Darkseid on Apocalypse, and it's revealed that the anti-life equation lives inside him. When Darkseid tries to take the equation, it is instead corrupted, causing Darkseid to explode Apocalypse. But not before Cyborg was sent to Earth. Once he arrives, he inadvertently infects the entire world with the anti-life equation, which has taken the form of a techno-organic virus. This turns millions of people and a lot of metahumans into zombies. The story follows the survivors as they try to quell the threat, and eventually leave the Earth to settle a new home. I kinda prefer this to the Marvel Zombie story. I don't know, it's a survival story instead of a funny zombie story. I like it. Sue me. Please don't sue me. Number 1, Dark Multiverse. First appearing in Dark Knight's Metal #1 in 2017, the Dark Multiverse is basically the shadow version of the regular DC universe that resides underneath the primary one. So there are negative versions of the 52 Earths of the regular multiverse, but it was also originally the World Forge, meaning it has so many more worlds. For example, there are worlds born from sentient life's hopes and fears. Honestly, each world here could take up a point on this list, but it feels like that's cheating a little. The World Forger was the master of this domain and created the Great Dragon, Barbados, to destroy unstable realities that couldn't join the Orrery of Worlds. Barbados, manipulated by Perpetua, rebelled and defeated the World Forger, creating the Dark Multiverse. A lot more happens after that, but I can't cover that in a 1-minute segment, so Dark Knight's Metal is an amazing story and it deserves your reading. Kicking off the list at number 10 is Justice Riders. You know what sells? Cowboys. Taking your characters and plopping them in a western setting is always a guaranteed money-making tactic. Sure, it's been done a million times, but in 1997, DC released Justice Riders, or in other words, a western Justice League composed of hootin' and hollerin' versions of Wonder Woman, Hawkman, Kid Flash, Martian Manhunter, Booster Gold, and Blue Beetle. It's honestly just wild. Obviously, to make the setting work, all the abilities of these heroes are turned way down, but in place of that, we got a quick drawing Martian Manhunter in a poncho and a big old hat, and Blue Beetle as a wacky scientist. I mean, come on. With all the style you might expect, the story is just as wild as the Wild West it takes place in. It follows Sheriff Diana Prince as she puts together this team of heroes to take on Maxwell Lord, who left her town a smoking stack of ruins. It's just a fun time and absolutely deserves your eyes on its paper, or screen, or whatever. Number 9, Justice League The Nail. This one is rather odd. It's kind of a Superman story, but without Superman. The premise is that the day that Kal-El crashed on Earth, the Kents drove over a nail and it gave them a flat tire, resulting in Superman never becoming a thing. And it's all based off a little poem that goes like this. For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. For want of a rider, the message was lost. For want of a message, the battle was lost. For want of a battle, the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a nail. Which is kind of cool. So essentially, it's all about the butterfly effect, which is kind of what Elseworlds is all about in the first place when you really think about it. Look at that. So, in this story, all the other heroes are here, but without that one central figure to embody their core values, without that main leader, the world actually fears the Justice League. The world is constantly standing against them, and the story shows how they struggle with not only the villains of the DC universe, but even their own public perception. And it's all because Superman is out of the picture. As much as it feels like a big testament to Superman's importance, it does actually show the strength of the other members of the League to a degree, which is nice because Superman is kind of boring. Sorry. Number 8, Kingdom Come. While a lot of the great Elseworlds stories deal with versions of specific characters, others deal with the whole DC universe of heroes and villains, and Kingdom Come is probably one of the best of that latter category. Here, the classic heroes who made up the Justice League, they've all basically retired. New heroes have sprung up in their place, but don't really hold the candle to those who came before, and they're also kind of evil. They barely care about saving people and cause a massive accident that takes out almost all of the Midwest of America. Superman in this world is convinced that the world did not want him to step down. Batman keeps Gotham in control using massive powerful robots. Green Lantern sits in an emerald fortress above the earth just watching. The Flash has basically become the Speed Force and keeps his city safe by basically being everywhere all at the same time, existing in the time between seconds. It's really cool. It's almost as if the Justice League had retired and then all the corrupt heroes from the boys took their place, and then the retired heroes come back to correct everything. There's a lot more to it than that, with some really cool stuff going on in all different places. Kingdom Come is like a love letter to DC Comics by DC Comics, and it has some of the most beautiful comic book art you or I has ever seen. Number 7, Batman Dracula. Some of the coolest stories involve Batman, and I mean, let's be honest, Batman himself is one of the coolest heroes. He's also the most human, literally just being a regular human who fights among gods and aliens against some of the biggest threats to humanity, including vampires. And when he goes up against the baddest and biggest one, Dracula himself, Batman becomes more than a man. He becomes the most justice-driven, terrifying vampire you've ever seen, and it's dope. When Dracula comes to Gotham, a good vampire grants Batman the vampiric gift in order to take on Dracula himself. And the idea was so awesome that it became a whole trilogy, starting with Red Rain, then Bloodstorm, and ending in Crimson Mist. All of which put the most obvious hero to become a vampire in one of the best Victorian horror styles, and with the most terrifying looks I have ever seen for the Dark Knight. Batman Dracula is truly one of the best versions of Batman ever, and 'tis all thanks to Elseworlds. Thank you. Number 6, Superman's secret identity. Now, to say that we can't believe this world exists is actually kind of a weird little stretch, because this is actually set in a world pretty much the same as ours. Coming from writer Kurt Busiek, who created his cult classic Astro City, which itself was a play on the DC Universe, DC Comics gave him the chance to write an actual story about his favorite superhero, Superman. Enter Superman's secret identity, which questions what would happen if Clark Kent existed in our own world. Just like our Earth, all the familiar DC Comics superheroes are just comic book characters, but for one boy in Kansas, who just happens to have the same name as Clark Kent, he discovers that he has Superman's superpowers for some unknown reason. This Elseworlds series covers a different era of Superman's life in each issue, from his teenage years to his old age, and then the birth of his superpowered daughters. It's just incredibly interesting to watch how this world works. Number 5, A League of One. Sometimes Elseworlds stories just bring us what we really want to see by asking the question of, why the heck not? And the Wonder Woman focused story Justice League A League of One by Christopher Mueller is one of those stories. The whole thing is just pure fun, basically armoring up Diana of Themyscira in untold amounts of plot armor and letting her defeat each of her teammates in honestly some pretty genius moves, all in order to bring down an ultimate evil, a dragon queen by the name of Dracul Carfang. If that sounds like it came straight out of a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, it really kind of feels that way. The book even picks up at the beginning of the 100 Years' War, setting up this ultimate evil. Speaking of Dungeons & Dragons though, the art in this book is all painted by Mueller himself, making it literally worthy of a Dungeons & Dragons cover, and it's filled to the brim with utter awesome fantasy mixed with superheroes, and honestly, 'tis just a really fun time for any Wonder Woman fan looking for something just a little bit different. Number 4, JSA The Liberty Files. The Justice Society of America, The Liberty Files, is a DC Elseworlds story from 2000 to 2003, which makes it non-canonical, obviously. Any story that lets writers go outside the rules of the DC canon always makes for stories that I personally love. But what's it about? The series took characters from the JSA but turned them into covert government operatives in World War II, and that is just the coolest thing. Specifically, the story centered on 3 heroes: Batman, who in this story is called Bat, Hourman, who's called Clock, and Dr. Midnight, called Owl. I know, really creative names, but the 3 were known as the Unholy Three, and their mission, at least in part 1 of the story, is to find Jack the Grin, who is the Joker, who has information about the German weapon Übermensch, or Superman. Are you sold yet? Because you should be, because it's really cool. Number 3, Batman I Joker. This comic may actually be one of my new favorites, and I'm almost ashamed to say I hadn't read it before. The Batman story is set in a cyberpunk dystopian future Gotham City where Bruce Wayne no longer lives. In his place is another Batman who goes by the title of the Bruce. The people of Gotham religiously worship the Bruce as their religious leader, with lackeys under him like the Gordon, who is like his herald, and his doctor. This descendant of Batman has created a citywide cult of the Bruce, and every year, as a ritual, rebels to the rule of the Bruce are captured, brainwashed, and transformed to become, essentially, copies of Two-Face, Ra's al Ghul, Penguin, and the Riddler, with one more criminal turned into the Joker. These fake criminals are then set free into the streets of Gotham, locked into vehicles, and are chased by the mob, the Bruce himself, or brave citizens who attempt to destroy the villains in order to face the Bruce and become the next Bruce. It's like taking the movies Death Race and Running Man, mashing them together, and then injecting some absolutely wacky and wild art to create a world of pure chaos. I don't want to give away the details, so if you haven't, check this book out. Number 2, Gotham by Gaslight. Gotham by Gaslight, like most Elseworld stories, is just super freaking cool. It's such an obviously brilliant concept. You take Batman, the greatest detective, and plop him in the Victorian era and have him take on one of the most compelling unsolved killer cases in history, Jack the Ripper. But then they go and make it even cooler by having Jack move to this really awesome Victorian Gotham City and give Batman and the Ripper a personal connection. The story even sees Bruce accused of being the killer himself, which adds yet another layer on top of everything else. Also, we have to talk about the incredibly cool art style in the comic, which came from Mike Mignola, who created Hellboy, and it just works perfectly in this Victorian setting. It's actually just a big old treat to read. Gotham by Gaslight was one of DC's most successful Elseworld stories, and it even got a 2018 animated adaptation, but has a completely different ending. Both versions, though, are really entertaining. And finally, in at number 1, Superman Red Sun. Probably one of the most beloved Superman stories ever, this story asks the question of what would happen if Kal-El had landed not in Kansas, but in the Soviet Union. Superman grows under the ideals of communism and is used by the Soviets as their weapon, helping bring almost the whole world into a super Soviet Union. It sees other heroic characters like Wonder Woman and Batman in this completely different world, and it really plays with the idea of freedom over security. It paints this Superman in a much darker light, as he will go to incredibly surprising lengths to achieve his goal of Soviet domination. He goes up against a Lex Luthor who becomes president of the United States, has Brainiac as a supercomputer assistant who eventually turns on him, and the end of the whole story? It's truly a mind-boggling experience to say the least. Also, just like Gotham by Gaslight, in 2020 we got an animated version of this story as well, and it's incredible. Oh, and fun fact, Superman Red Sun is real-life Superman Henry Cavill's favorite Superman story, which is just really interesting. And at number 10, Batman Dracula. Some of the coolest stories involve Batman, and I mean, let's be honest, Batman himself is one of the coolest heroes. He's also the most human, literally just being a regular human who fights among gods and aliens against some of the biggest threats to humanity, including vampires. And when he goes up against the baddest and biggest vampire, Dracula himself, Batman becomes more than a man. He becomes the most justice-driven, terrifying vampire you've ever seen, and it is dope. When Dracula comes to Gotham, a good vampire grants Batman the vampiric gift in order to take on Dracula himself, and the idea was so awesome that it became a whole trilogy, starting with Red Rain, then Bloodstorm, and ending in Crimson Mist, all of which put the most obvious hero to become a vampire in one of the best Victorian horror styles and with the most terrifying looks I have ever seen for the Dark Knight. Batman Dracula is truly one of the best versions of Batman ever, and 'tis all thanks to Elseworlds. Number 9, Justice Riders. You know what sells? Cowboys, baby. Taking your characters and plopping them in a western setting is always a guaranteed money-making tactic. Sure, it's been done a million times, but in 1997, DC released Justice Riders, or in other words, a western Justice League composed of hootin' and hollerin' versions of Wonder Woman, Hawkman, Kid Flash, Martian Manhunter, Booster Gold, and Blue Beetle, which is just the weirdest arrangement for a Justice League ever, but it's so cool. It's just wild. Obviously, to make the setting work, all the abilities of these heroes are turned way down, but in place of that, we got a quick drawing Martian Manhunter in a poncho and a big old hat, and Blue Beetle as a wacky scientist. It's super cool. With all the style you might expect, the story is just as wild as the Wild West it takes place in. It follows Sheriff Diana Prince as she puts together this team of heroes to take on Maxwell Lord, who left her town as a smoking stack of ruins. It's just a fun time and absolutely deserves a read from you. Number 8, Green Lantern Earth 1. This Green Lantern focused story is one that I actually really like. It brushes over a lot of things very easily, but it made me care about the Green Lanterns, and that's something I didn't think was gonna happen. I don't really care about them normally, but in this one I do. It almost feels like a dark sci-fi take on Hal Jordan and the Green Lanterns. Essentially, in this story, Hal Jordan is on the moon with a crew of workers who mine for metal when he comes across a crashed alien ship containing the Green Lantern ring, a Green Lantern battery, the corpse of Abin Sur, and a robot called a Manhunter. Hal claimed the ring, just taking it off the alien corpse, and used it to fight the Manhunter that sprung on him. What had happened is that the Manhunter robots were created by the Guardians of the Universe to take out the Green Lanterns as the Lanterns had grown uncontrollable, and they were pretty successful but also grew out of control, putting the galaxy in peril and leaving the Green Lantern core broken and spread extremely thin. Hal meets up with an equally inexperienced Kilowag, and they go across the universe trying to rally together any Green Lanterns they can. The best way I saw it described was as if Christopher Nolan and Ridley Scott teamed up and made a Green Lantern story. It feels like that, and it's just such a cool and fresh story. You should definitely check it out. Hey you nerds! I hope you're enjoying this video, but if you are, make sure you hit the like button so that we know that this is what you want to see and we can make more of it. Cool? Okay, cool. Moving on. Number 7, Justice League The Nail. This one is rather odd. It's kind of a Superman story, but without Superman. The premise is that the day that Kal-El crashed on Earth, the Kents drove over a nail and it gave them a flat tire, resulting in Superman just never becoming a thing. And it's all based off a little poem. The poem goes like this: For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. For want of a rider, the message was lost. For want of a message, the battle was lost. And for want of a battle, the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a nail. So essentially it's all about the butterfly effect, which is kind of what Elseworlds is all about in the first place when you really think about it. Wow, look at that, so cool. So, in this story, all the other heroes are here, but without that one central figure to embody their core values. Without that main leader, the world actually fears the Justice League. The world is constantly standing against them, and the story shows how they struggle with not only the villains of the DC universe, but even their own public perception, and it's all because Superman is out of the picture. As much as it feels like a big testament to Superman's importance, it does also show the strength of the other members of the League to a degree, which is nice because Superman is just kind of boring. Number 6, Luthor. But do you know what isn't boring? Lex Luthor's view of Superman, and that's what leads me to our next pick. Luthor is a brilliant inversion of the normal Superman story we are all used to. In this story, we get to see Metropolis, Superman, and the rest of the world through the eyes of Lex Luthor. And from his point of view, Superman is utterly terrifying. He's a menace that could destroy the world and the world Luthor has built beneath his burning alien gaze. It flips the whole thing on its head, and while it's relatively short, it does a lot in that small time, showing us the lengths to which Lex Luthor is willing to go to achieve his ideals, but it also tells pretty plainly why he would go to those lengths in the first place. This comic inspired the insanely good Joker story that is this one's spiritual successor, and for that alone, it definitely deserves praise. It's just nice to see a story from a perspective different to the everyday superhero story. Coming in at number 5 is Gotham by Gaslight. Gotham by Gaslight, like most Elseworlds stories, is just super freaking cool. It's such an obvious, brilliant concept. You take Batman, the greatest detective ever, and you plop him in the Victorian era and have him take on one of the most compelling unsolved serial killer cases in history, Jack the Ripper. But then, they go and make it even cooler by having Jack move to this really awesome Victorian Gotham City, and they give Batman and the Ripper a personal connection. The story even sees Bruce accused of being the killer himself, which adds yet another layer on top of everything else. Also, we have to talk about the incredibly cool art style in the comic, which came from Mike Mignola, who created Hellboy, and it just works perfectly in this Victorian setting. It's actually just a big old treat to read. Gotham by Gaslight was one of DC's most successful Elseworlds stories, and it even got a 2018 animated adaptation, but it has a completely different ending. Both versions are really cool and really entertaining, so just pick one. Number 4, Superman Red Sun. Probably one of the most beloved Superman stories ever. This story asks the question of what would happen if Kal-El had landed not in Kansas, but in the Soviet Union. Superman grows under the ideals of communism and is used by the Soviets as their weapon, helping bring almost the whole world into a super Soviet Union. It sees other heroic characters like Wonder Woman and Batman in this completely different world and really plays with the idea of freedom over security. It paints this Superman in a much darker light, as he will go to incredibly surprising lengths to achieve his goal of Soviet domination. He goes up against a Lex Luthor who becomes president of the United States, has Brainiac as a supercomputer assistant who eventually turns on him, and the end of the whole story? It's a truly mind-boggling experience to say the least. Also, just like Gotham by Gaslight, in 2020 we got an animated version of this story as well, and it's incredible. Oh, and fun fact, Superman Red Son is real-life Superman Henry Cavill's favorite Superman story, which is really interesting. Like, could you imagine a Henry Cavill Superman Red Son live action movie? Number 3. Kingdom Come. While a lot of the great Elseworlds stories deal with versions of specific characters, others deal with the whole DC universe of heroes and villains, and Kingdom Come is probably one of the best of them. Here, the classic heroes who made up the Justice League, they've all basically retired. New heroes have sprung up in their place, but they don't hold a candle to those who came before. They barely even care about saving people and cause a massive accident that takes out almost all of the Midwest of America. Superman has been convinced that the world wanted him to step down. Batman keeps Gotham in control using massive, powerful robots. Green Lantern sits in an emerald fortress above the earth just watching. The Flash has basically become the Speed Force and keeps his city safe by basically being everywhere all at once, existing in the time between seconds. It's almost as if the Justice League had retired and then all the corrupt heroes from the boys took their place, and then the retired heroes come back to correct everything. There's a lot more to it than that, with some really cool stuff going on in all different kinds of places. Kingdom Come is like a love letter to DC Comics by DC Comics, and it has some of the most beautiful comic book art you've ever seen. Coming in at number 2 is The Dark Knight Returns. Technically speaking, Elseworlds stories simply have to take place outside the normal DC continuity for them to count as Elseworlds stories, or they have to have that little watermark thing on it, but I'm changing the rules here. Which means that Frank Miller's globally praised The Dark Knight Returns is an Elseworlds story, and that makes it one of the best ones. Set in the 80s, it actually tells the tale of an old, grizzled, militaristic Batman who comes out of retirement in the face of an American government that has become more and more dictatorial. He takes on a new Robin, he faces off against an old sadistic Joker, and Bats beats the absolute snot out of Superman in one of the most famous comic book fights ever. The unique style of the comic also just adds another layer to this work of art. Sure, the books that followed were kind of horrible in my opinion in comparison, and extremely odd, but the one that came first has a special place in so many people's hearts, and for good reason. And finally, in at number 1, The New Frontier. Most Elseworlds stories give us a world with some radical difference, usually that leaves the world worse for wear. Usually the horror of those worlds gives justifications for why heroes must become stronger, go to greater lengths, or show the fullest extent of their might in ways impossible when restricted by the regular DC canon. But in The New Frontier, we get a world that challenges the heroes to do good in a moral sense, to reach the fullest extent of their hopes and ideals rather than their physical limits, and all without losing track of what makes a story just so freaking good. It's a story about heroes who are worthy of being called that, who inhabit a world that wants so desperately to change for the better. It depicts the DC universe during a post-Korean War era with superheroes outlawed by the government. It's also the beginning of the Space Age, which leads to the story being told from the perspectives of Hal Jordan and Martian Manhunter. Fans of Elseworlds think of this one as the most perfect. Each subplot is just as unique as the main story, and the characters are all fully realized with different arcs. It also gives a beautiful theme. The story is just about leaving behind a dark past and looking to the bright future. And like all the other great Elseworlds, there's also a movie, so you don't really have to actually read anything, which is always a good time.
Coming in number 10, we have another Flashpoint. This seems like the most common way that the DC universe could end. It doesn't matter how many times the speedster runs as fast as he can never run fast enough to change the world for the better. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, the Flashpoint is when the Flash runs so fast he goes back in time to reset things. things. The most famous version of this is when he runs back in time to stop his mom from being killed when he was a kid, and comes back to the present day to find that everything has fallen out of control. Bruce Wayne is dead, Thomas Wayne is Batman, Martha Wayne is the Joker, Atlantis and Themyscira are fighting over Earth in the biggest war that the world has ever seen, and Superman is a withered cower in a bunker that can barely talk. I hate to say it, but things were better the other way around, Barry. So Barry Allen has to run back in time at the end of this to reset everything so it can return to the way it was. Now we do see the Flash pull off this move again in the Justice League Dark universe, which I love. The Flash runs back through time to reset the world after the League just defeated Darkseid, because even though the heroes defeated the big baddie, half of them are dead and the other half are either insane, traumatized, or 50% robot. So will we see a flashpoint where things go very wrong and time itself is ripped apart and everything ceases to exist? Maybe. Coming at number 9, we have Superman Goes Loco. This has been the backbone of a lot of comics. Superman is so powerful that his presence can basically be the backbone of how an entire series will play out. If he's there, the day is saved. If he's not, everyone dies. We have seen this so many times in the DC universe that I am honestly impressed by how the writers are able to find new and interesting ways to keep using Superman's unbeatable powers. But what would happen if the boy in blue lost his mind? I'm not talking about like going crazy like he does in the Injustice games, where you can kind of see his point of view, but he's still really ruthless. I'm talking about he just wants to murder. If Superman went truly insane, like homicidal rage insane, then we could see him just fly from planet to planet and start blowing them up, and who's going to stop him? It would take a very powerful team of magic users and a back catalog of kryptonite to take him out. Actually, that's a comic I would really like to read. A super magic team put together to kill an insane Superman that's flying through the space trying to kill everything? Someone get DC Comics on the phone, we got a winner. Coming at number 8, we have Just Too Old. Some of you watching are going to be huge fans of the DC animated universe, and why wouldn't you be? It's absolutely amazing. You might remember the episode where the whole league gets turned into kids, a trope that we have seen in comics again and again, along with other media. In this episode, the powerful magic user Mordred blasts out a spell that sends any adult to another world so he can be the ruler of Earth with all the other kids that he wants to be around. This means that the League is trapped in an alternate dimension with everyone that's over the age of 13. This is why the League gets turned into children, so they can come back to Earth and then fight Mordred. But if the League lost that fight, that would have been the end of the universe, as eventually everyone except for Mordred, who has been blessed with eternal youth, would have aged out and been banished away. Next on the list, we have Poison Ivy has had enough. It's no secret that Poison Ivy doesn't really have a soft spot for anything living and breathing unless it's green and has petals. She's a wook in the truest sense of the word. To her, every nature lover is just a poser. So if she got the chance, she would probably erase all non-plant life on the planet so everything could be green. What would this mean for people? Well, everyone would probably be turned into plant people, similar to her, or they would just be killed. I don't know how bad she wants company. There's a story arc called Queen Ivy, where she becomes fed up with humanity once again and decides that she is going to rebrand herself as Queen Ivy, and she sends her roots into the foundation of Gotham to tear it down. With a lot of the DC heroes not seeing Ivy as a threat currently, as she has been going through a anti-hero phase, she might be able to pull a fast one on all the soups and get the Flora Paradise that she has always wanted. Next on the list, we have the Crime Syndicate returns. The Crime Syndicate has been used again and again in the DC universe, and I truly love them. I know that this is an old trope not only in comics but pretty much everywhere. I mean, we can fly back in time to evil Spock, who was repping that goatee. I think that's when the goatee became a symbol of villainy. But even though this trope is tired and old, having heroes face off against their evil counterparts is so fun, because you usually get to see how heroes would beat each other if they ever fought, and if they didn't have to hold back. And the Crime Syndicate comes with some cool variations to the Justice League, like how Superwoman has a lasso of submission, and Ultraman has to feed on kryptonite to get powers and is weakened by the sun. But when we see this team of terror rip through a wormhole in the New 52, they nearly take out the entire League by trapping them inside Firestorm, which would have caused him to explode if they weren't eventually freed. But if the Syndicate had their way, the DC Universe would have been destroyed before the New 52 ever got its footing. Next on the list we have Monarch 2001. Some of you will remember the comic run from the early 90s called Armageddon 2001. This showcased a future date that is not far from our own. The comic took place in the year 2030 and the world was dystopian because everything had been destroyed by a new all-powerful villain who had seemed to dismantle and destroy the Justice League. His name was Monarch, and the reason that the comic was called Armageddon 2001 was because that was the year that the Monarch decided that he was going to rise to power and take over the world. Pretty dark if you ask me. The heroes weren't able to stop him and he was able to bring an end to everything that they knew and loved. Could a return of Monarch mark the end of the DC universe? Next on the list we have Brainiac finally succeeds. See, I like Brainiac. I think he's a cool villain. He's one of the only dudes that's been able to take on Superman, and he's probably the smartest being in the universe. If not, he's definitely up there. But his motivations are just so boring. He goes from planet to planet and puts each one of them in a little jar so he can keep all their data and he can just keep learning. Like, that is the nerdiest way to be an evil doer. He's evil because he wants everything to be organized. Maybe the dude just has OCD. But he could for sure bring the end of the DC universe. If he was ever able to get past the Justice League, he would keep bottling up the universe until nothing was left. And with each passing planet, he would be getting more and more powerful. Next on the list, we got all the top dogs are gone. There is no debate about who is at the top of the ladder when it comes to the Justice League. Well, in the comic Justice League of America Destiny, we get to see what it would look like if the Dark Knight and the Man of Steel were never there to help out. And it looks like the rest of the members can't keep up with the world falling apart. So if we were to see something happen that would cause Superman and Batman to disappear, that might bring the end of the DC universe, and it would really hurt DC's stock price. Next on the list, we have Trigon controls Darkseid. If you haven't seen the movie Justice League Dark Apocalypse, just know that I'm about to hit you with some spoilers for that movie, so if you're worried about them, you might want to skip past this point. I highly recommend watching that movie because it is amazing, but in it you have Darkseid succeed in taking out the Justice League, and then he takes over the world and continues to dominate the universe. Superman is left powerless, and years later a slapdash team of surviving heroes is put together to try and take out Darkseid. While this assault on Apokolips is taking place, Trigon escapes from Raven's mind and he takes over Superman's body. This Trigon Superman fusion fights Darkseid and kind of whoops his butt. This ends with Superman pushing Trigon out of his body, but Trigon later materializes in his own form and starts duking out with Darkseid, and the two of them are sucked into a boom tube that in theory killed them, but they were probably just floating around in another dimension. Now, this universe is restarted at the end of the movie because everyone is jacked up and the world is a mess. But if Trigon and Darkseid ended up in another universe and Trigon defeats Darkseid, he could take control of his body like he did Superman, and then you have a Trigon Darkseid combo that could probably kill everything. And coming in at the #1 spot, we have Dr. Manhattan Says So. I mean, do I really need to get into too much detail about this? He might be the most powerful being in the DC universe. In a way, he is a god. If there's anyone watching who doesn't know what I'm talking about, I'll give you a brief breakdown on this cosmic force. In the comic book The Watchmen, we are introduced to Dr. Manhattan, who was just a man until an accident ripped his atoms apart. And since then, he has the power to bend matter to his will and even shape it as he sees fit. He could create life. He could destroy life. There's a comic arc where he actually is the person who made the entire DC universe. He is living energy, immortal, a god of gods. He could even turn Superman into a bed of flowers. He's not really good or evil, he just is. And if he wanted to, because he thought things needed to change or because he was just bored, he could erase and rewrite the entire universe faster than the Flash. And that would be no guesswork. It would all be with precision.